Hello, I'm Kira. My sister poured Pepsi on my head at our mother's birthday party, ruining my $400 silk blouse. They all laughed. No one helped. That should have been the worst part. But it wasn't. Because behind that one moment was years of erasure. They cut me out of family photos. They forged my name on documents. They sold the house I was promised. They lied to get me out of boardrooms. And changed the name on wedding gifts I paid for. And when I finally spoke up, when I stopped keeping the peace, they said I was the problem. But what happens when the quiet one stops playing by their rules? What happens when you fight back, not with screaming, but with truth? Do you want to know how my millionaire husband got involved? Because he did. And when he did, everything changed. So tell me, what would you do if your own family tried to erase you? I pulled into the gravel driveway slower than usual, the crunch beneath my tires feeling louder than it should have on a Sunday afternoon. It was early spring in Charlotte, warm enough to sweat in long sleeves, but cool enough for people to pretend they needed cardigans. I parked beside Vera's spotless black SUV, already knowing she'd picked the best spot, closest to the walkway, as if her license plate should have read Firstborn. I stayed in the car for a moment, watching the front door open and shut as relatives came and went. Laughter floated through the air, mixed with the scent of barbecue ribs and over-sugared lemonade. It should have felt like home, except it didn't. The gift on the passenger seat beside me was wrapped in a deep burgundy ribbon, hand-tied. I had it custom-made for Mom weeks ago, a framed charcoal sketch of the house we grew up in, done by a local artist. It wasn't loud, but it was meaningful. A piece of our history, before the paint peeled and before the people inside began choosing sides. I took a deep breath and stepped out. Henrietta's house hadn't changed, white siding, creaky porch steps, wind chimes that hadn't made a full sound in years. As I reached the door, I smiled on cue. One of the aunts saw me first, Aunt Joyce, I think, and waved, surprised. "Kira, oh, I almost didn't recognize you." "You mean because I haven't changed a bit?" I joked, half-heartedly. She smiled and pulled me in for a hug that lasted 2 seconds too long. When she pulled back, her eyes trailed down my blouse. "Well, look at you, still dressing like you're going to court." I said nothing. That blouse, soft cream silk with a structured collar, wasn't about status. It was armor. Inside, it was loud and familiar. The kind of loud that comes from generations of potluck energy and old arguments buried under sweet potato pie. I scanned the room. Sable was near the kitchen, fiddling with a tray of deviled eggs. Vera stood center stage, lipstick perfect, telling a story I was already too tired to hear. She saw me, raised her glass slightly, and smiled like she hadn't just ignored my last 4 texts. "Hey there, stranger," she said, approaching. "Didn't think you'd make it. Thought you'd be too busy jet-setting with Alaric." I shrugged. Even millionaires' wives get PTO. A few heads turned. It was the first mention of my husband all afternoon. The tension that followed was immediate and intentional. I walked toward the dining room to set down my gift. No one stopped me. No one asked what it was. I might as well have dropped off a casserole. The formal photo setup had already started. Vera and Sable were huddled around Mom. They wore color-coordinated pastels. I stood a few feet away, waiting to be invited into the shot. It didn't happen. "Can someone grab the youngest?" a cousin asked. "I think she's outside," Sable replied, without looking at me. I stayed still, invisible. We moved to the living room for the tribute video. Everyone squeezed in, plastic chairs creaking under the weight of family legacy. The screen lit up with smiling photos. Vera at prom, Vera in college, Vera opening her boutique. She was the rock, the narrator said. Then came Sable, calm and steady, the wisdom in silence. My photo showed up last. One picture, my wedding day, and a voice that said, "And of course, our lovely Kira, wife of the brilliant Alaric." No mention of my degree, my practice, the cases I'd won, or the nonprofits I worked with. Just my relationship. My stomach tightened. I turned toward Zinnia, who was laughing and capturing parts of the video for her Instagram story. They'd reduced me to a last name I didn't even change legally. No one clapped after my slide. The room just moved on. I stood and made my way back to the dining room. My blouse clung slightly at the base of my neck from sweat. I reached for a napkin to dab myself, but before I could, Vzzt, splash! A cold rush hit my shoulder first, then trickled down my back. A ripple of gasps followed. Vera stood in front of me, holding an empty can of Pepsi, a perfectly rehearsed look of shock on her face. "Oh my God," she said. "Kira, I'm so sorry, I didn't see you there." The Pepsi soaked straight through my blouse, staining it in a pattern that looked almost intentional. My hair was sticky, clinging to the side of my face. Someone near the hallway whispered, "Maybe next time she'll wear something washable." I didn't say a word. I didn't grab a towel. I didn't flinch. I just stood there. Vera placed her hand lightly on my shoulder. "You all right, sis?" I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time in years, I saw the smirk beneath her sympathy. I stepped back, then walked calmly to the back door. No one followed. Outside, the garden was still. Birds flitted between trees. The fence my father built decades ago was graying at the edges. I pulled out my phone, angled the camera toward my ruined blouse, and took a photo, then another, and another. Not for sympathy, but for proof. I whispered to myself, just loud enough to make it real. Let's remember exactly how this day felt. I didn't raise my voice, but something in me had already shifted. I stayed in the garden longer than I should have, pretending the magnolia tree beside me still smelled like childhood. The grass beneath my heels was soft and uneven, the way it always had been, like the ground here never quite knew what to hold steady. My blouse was stiff now. The Pepsi had dried into a sticky film against my skin, darkening the fabric and tugging gently every time I moved. I found a linen napkin on a patio chair, damp from condensation, and wiped what I could. I wasn't going to leave. That would have given Vera too much satisfaction. She expected me to retreat, like always. But I walked back inside instead, head high, smile stitched tight, shoulders square. The living room had thinned out. A few cousins were chatting over the buffet line. Someone had started cutting the carrot cake. As I passed the hallway leading toward the den, I heard my name. "Well, you know," Vera's voice floated out. "Some girls get lucky once in life." That was hers. There was a pause, the kind of pause where people look around to see if it's safe to laugh. Two women I recognized vaguely, friends from Vera's old sorority days, stood by the punch bowl. One of them chuckled, hand fluttering up to her mouth. The other smiled politely but glanced in my direction. I didn't stop walking. I didn't turn. I just kept heading toward the kitchen like I was looking for something. But I remembered. It wasn't the first time she'd said it. 3 years ago, during my cousin Keisha's wedding, Vera had said the same thing. We'd flown in, Alaric and I, on the red-eye from San Francisco. He had meetings, but he cleared his schedule to meet the family properly. I was by the buffet table when I overheard her, back then too. Same words, same tone. Well, you know, Kira just lucked out. Some people land the jackpot once and make it their personality. The laughter was softer then, but it stuck with me. I didn't say anything that day either. I remember holding Alaric's hand extra tightly later at dinner. He never asked why, and now, years later, the same line, repeated like a family mantra. I stood by the window near the dining room table, letting the hum of conversation blend into static. Henrietta tapped her glass, signaling a speech. "I just want to say thank you to everyone who made this day so special," she began, her voice louder than usual, practiced. "To Vera, my rock, to Sable, my steady hand, and to—" She hesitated, eyes scanning for me. "Our youngest, Kayla? For making it too." Laughter rippled, light, harmless to them. I smiled. The kind of smile you use when someone mispronounces your name in an interview and you decide not to correct them because it doesn't matter anymore. I caught Vera glancing at me, satisfied. No one corrected Mom. Not even Sable, who just looked down into her cup like maybe she didn't hear it. I stood in the back, not beside anyone, not near the cake, not in the pictures. And then Alaric arrived. He slipped in through the side entrance, unannounced as always. No grand entrance, no dramatic fanfare. He made his way through the room quietly, nodding politely, acknowledging those who nodded back with that small, respectful smile of his. He reached me and said nothing, just looked. Then, without a word, he took off his blazer, unfolded it carefully, and draped it across my shoulders. It was still warm from his body. He didn't say, "What happened?" He didn't say, "Who did this?" He just looked at me like he already knew. I swallowed whatever had been rising in my throat. "Thank you," I whispered. His hand brushed my back briefly before he leaned in to say, "Let's not stay long." I nodded, but I didn't move, not yet. As the family started gathering again near the fireplace for more photos, I stayed where I was, observing. A cousin, Tracy or Trina, I couldn't remember, passed by with a plate and muttered to her friend, "That's Kara, right? The lawyer one?" Kara. I wasn't angry. I was hollow. I used to think they forgot me because I wasn't loud enough, bright enough, or dramatic enough to burn into their memories. But now I was beginning to understand. They didn't forget me. They just chose not to remember me correctly. It was easier that way. Easier to rewrite me into something palatable, forgettable. The girl who got lucky. The wife of the rich guy. The extra guest at their own mother's birthday. We stayed another 20 minutes, long enough to be polite. Alaric excused us with the practiced grace of someone who's navigated enough boardrooms and banquets to know how to leave without causing waves. Back in the car, I pulled the seatbelt across my chest and leaned back. The seat was cool, comforting. Alaric started the engine. "You okay?" I turned my head slowly. "Define okay." He smiled gently. "Capable of taking down an empire if provoked?" I let out a breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "Getting closer." He reached over and gave my hand a squeeze. Then he pulled the car into gear. We didn't talk the rest of the ride. But in the silence, something rooted deeper. Not pain. No, I'd had plenty of that. Resolve. After we pulled out of Mom's driveway, Alaric reached over and turned the radio down without saying a word. The road ahead was quiet, almost too still for the heaviness sitting between us. I didn't speak. He didn't press. But somewhere between the corner gas station and the blinking yellow light on Fairview, I knew I wasn't ready to go home just yet. "Do you mind if we stop by for a few minutes?" I asked, my voice low. Alaric glanced over. "Of course. Take your time." I needed to go back inside that house. I told myself it was because I'd forgotten my sunglasses, but really, I wanted to see something again. Something I thought I remembered clearly. We circled back. Most of the guests were gone by then. A few folding chairs were stacked on the porch. The Bluetooth speaker that had blasted 80s soul was silent now. Inside, the kitchen smelled of sweet tea and exhaustion. No one noticed me walking in. I didn't call out. I moved through the house like a ghost, unseen, but somehow still burdened by every wall. As I passed the hallway near the bathroom, I paused. The wall of family. It stretched along the entire corridor, photos in all shapes and frames, like a timeline only the favored were invited to live in. There was Vera at her debutante ball, Vera again at the University of Georgia in her white sorority dress, Sable at prom, holding a bouquet she barely smiled behind. There were baby pictures of Zinnia, even one of Sable's cat wearing a bow tie. I searched for myself. One photo, graduation day, and I wasn't even centered. I was on the far edge, mid-blink, partially blocked by Aunt Marion's big church hat. I leaned closer. My heart slowed. One particular photo stood out, the family portrait from my college graduation. I remembered that day clearly. We'd all posed together in front of the stone library steps. I wore a green stole over my black robe, standing dead center. But in the photo on the wall now, I was missing. They had photoshopped me out, not skillfully either. A strange blur covered the spot where I had once stood. The tree line behind us looked warped, like someone had tried to paste over history, but didn't care if the pixels aligned. My hands clenched at my sides. Footsteps creaked down the hallway behind me. I turned as Sable appeared, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Oh," she said, stopping short. "Looking at the old photos?" I straightened my posture. "Wasn't I in this one?" I pointed without raising my voice. She walked closer, didn't even look at the image. Maybe it was another day. You weren't always around, remember? I didn't reply. Because I did remember. I remembered every moment I showed up, even when no one asked me to. Every flight I booked home. Every time I adjusted my schedule to make a birthday, a graduation, or a church fundraiser. Sable gave me a small smile and walked past, her sandals clicking against the hardwood as she disappeared into the kitchen. Later, everyone gathered in the living room again. The energy was looser now, the kind that comes after a long day of forced pleasantries. Wine glasses clinked. Plates were piled with whatever was left of the catered food. Vera was in her element. She stood near the fireplace, weaving her hands dramatically as she shared yet another childhood tale that I knew would feature me in a role I never agreed to play. Kira was always sick as a kid, she began with a chuckle. One time, Mom had to cancel her anniversary dinner. She had a reservation and everything because little Miss Drama Queen here ended up in the ER again. What was it that time? A fever of 99 and a sore throat? The room laughed, not because it was funny, but because Vera knew how to make anything sound like a joke. Zinnia, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looked up at her mom, her brows slightly furrowed. I stayed silent. My eyes were on Henrietta, who chuckled along. She didn't correct anything, didn't add context, just smiled and nodded, as if to say, yes, Kira was the fragile one, the inconvenience. I let my gaze drift to the side table where 2 cakes sat. Someone had brought out a second one earlier, chocolate with cream cheese frosting, decorated with Happy April Birthdays in blue icing. Zinnia got a slice. So did Darren, a cousin I barely spoke to. Even Sable took a piece. Plates passed from hand to hand. No one mentioned my birthday. April 3rd. I had brought a red velvet cake, too. I'd written, "For Mom, from Kira," on the post-it note and placed it carefully in the fridge when I arrived. No candles. No need for a big moment. I just thought, maybe she'd like a slice later. I walked to the kitchen. The fridge hummed quietly as I opened it. My cake was still there, untouched. The note hadn't been moved. I took it out, grabbed a plastic bag from the drawer, and slid the cake inside. It was a small thing, a quiet heartbreak, but it hit harder than anything that day. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wait to be noticed. I walked back out, the cake in one hand, my car keys in the other. Driving home, I didn't turn the music on. I didn't cry, either. I pulled off the freeway, took the long way around through the older neighborhoods I used to walk in high school. As I waited at a stoplight, I opened the family group chat, the one with the little dancing emoji Mom used when she reminded us about Thanksgiving, the one Vera renamed last year to the Washington Legacy. I stared at it for a full minute before pressing the leave button. A confirmation popped up. "Are you sure you want to leave this conversation?" I tapped yes. I murmured, maybe it's not that I left them. Maybe they erased me first. I didn't send it that day, but the day after, they gave me a reason to. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when nothing feels urgent until it is. I had just returned from a client deposition and noticed Henrietta's scarf folded neatly in the back seat of my car. She must have left it there during the party. I figured I'd swing by her place and drop it off. Simple. No lingering. In and out. The air was humid, thick enough to cling to the windows, and the driveway was crowded with cars again. Though this time, it wasn't a formal gathering. More like an unplanned family hangout, which wasn't uncommon at her house. I parked across the street and walked up the porch steps. The front door was slightly ajar, and I could hear laughter from the backyard. Vera's voice stood out instantly, crisp, loud, like she needed the world to know she was leading whatever conversation was happening. I stepped inside without knocking, scarf in hand. I didn't announce myself. Something told me not to. The house smelled like leftover barbecue and pine sol. The TV was playing on low volume in the den. I passed through the front hallway, intending to leave the scarf on the entryway table and be gone. But as I reached the kitchen, I stopped. Voices carried from the open window that overlooked the backyard patio. "She's got her rich husband and that big house. She doesn't need this old place," Vera was saying, her tone casual, like she was talking about the weather. "She's barely around," Sable added, matter of fact. "We've all done the heavy lifting with Mom. Kira probably won't even notice." My breath caught. I didn't move. Let's just get the signatures from Mom and us, Vera continued. Kira's name isn't on the deed anyway. We'll get it done. Quietly. There was a pause, then laughter. I stood frozen behind the kitchen doorframe, gripping the scarf so tightly it left wrinkles in the silk. I wasn't surprised, not really, but hearing them say it out loud, so shamelessly, like I was a ghost they could discuss freely, it hit harder than I'd expected. I stepped back slowly, careful not to make a sound, and walked back toward the front door. Before I left, I glanced over at the living room wall again. The photos, the same ones I'd seen last week. I wasn't in any new ones. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call Alaric. I didn't even cry. Instead, I let the memory of my father float up, uninvited. It was summer, sometime around junior year of high school. He had me help him paint the fence out back. He'd handed me a brush, already dipped, and said, "You know what this means, right?" I had shrugged. "Chores?" He laughed. "Responsibility. This house, this land, it's part of your story, too. One day, this will be yours." I didn't say anything back then, but I remembered smiling. I remember thinking, he sees me. Now all I could see was how fast that promise had disappeared with him. When I pulled into our driveway, Alaric wasn't home yet. I carried the scarf into the house, placed it on the hallway bench, and went into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. That's when my phone buzzed, a text from my niece, Camille. "Thanks, Aunt Vera, this is amazing. The espresso machine works perfectly." I stared at it. Espresso machine? I had ordered that for Camille's wedding gift. A limited-run design from a boutique importer in Milan. I'd paid for gift wrapping and a handwritten card that said, "Proud of you. Love, Aunt Kira." I opened my email, searched the shipping confirmation. Sure enough, the message had been updated. The sender name had been changed. The message read, "Congratulations. With love, Aunt Vera." I didn't respond to Camille. Instead, I forwarded the original purchase receipt to Malis, my assistant, and wrote, "If someone edits sender names in future orders, I'd like to be notified." She replied within minutes. "Of course, Miss Washington, I wasn't aware of any edits. I'll review everything and update settings." I knew she was being professional, even confused. I didn't blame her. But that was the moment I created a new folder on my desktop. I named it, Not Forgotten. I started dragging things into it, screenshots, emails, tracking numbers, digital receipts, evidence, not for legal use. Not yet. But for me, a ledger of every moment someone tried to make me invisible. Later that evening, just before sunset, I stepped into the backyard. The magnolia tree was blooming again. Small white blossoms, curled like secrets. I sat down on the stone bench Alaric and I had installed last fall. The cushions were slightly damp from the sprinkler system. I pulled my phone from my pocket and looked at the photos I'd taken after the Pepsi incident. The blouse was ruined. I'd thrown it out, but the image stayed. Me, smiling politely, stained and stiff. I thought about something my therapist had told me during a particularly difficult session months ago. "Your silence was once self-protection," she had said. "It might be time to decide if it still is." I whispered, "Not anymore." That night, after dinner, leftover grilled salmon and a half glass of white wine, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up my email. I clicked Compose. To Henrietta Washington, Vera Washington, Sable Washington. Subject, Your decisions. I started typing. "If you choose to make decisions about family property without me, make them without me for good. Don't expect my presence at any future event. You've made my place clear." I sat back in my chair, read it over 3 times. The cursor blinked at me. I hovered over Send. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. The kind that only comes when you finally stop pretending someone else is going to do the right thing. I didn't hit send. Not yet. But the draft stayed open, right there on my screen, waiting. Just like me. The email sat in my sent folder less than 3 minutes before Henrietta called. I saw her name flash across the screen as I pulled into my office parking spot. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. No way was I answering yet. 20 minutes later, I checked the message. "Hi, honey. It's Mom. Listen, can you come by for lunch tomorrow? Just the two of us. I'd really like to talk. Just us girls. I miss talking to you. That voice, so measured, so practiced, was always her specialty. She knew how to soften a sharp blade with sweet honey. But even with all I'd seen, all I'd heard, part of me still hoped this invitation was genuine. That maybe the email had shaken something loose, that maybe she finally wanted to see me without squinting. I called her back later that evening. She answered on the second ring. "I'll come by," I said. "Oh, good," she replied, instantly warm. "I'll make us some chicken salad, your favorite." The next day, I arrived at noon sharp. Alaric offered to drive me, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. My blouse was soft chambray, not silk, no armor today, just awareness. Henrietta greeted me at the door with a long, grandmotherly hug. She smelled like cinnamon and something floral, probably the lotion she'd used since I was a kid. It almost disarmed me. Almost. Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I just made sweet tea. And yes, I used the good sugar, not that Splenda nonsense." I followed her to the kitchen, where the table was already set for two. White linen napkins, china plates, not paper ones like during the birthday party. A mason jar of daisies sat in the middle of the table. "Looks nice," I said quietly, taking a seat. She smiled and poured the tea. "I just thought we could sit and chat. No noise, no sisters, no drama." I nodded but said nothing. Lunch was polite. We talked about the heat, about Zinnia's college plans, about how the neighbor's dog kept tearing through her hydrangeas. It was surface-level fluff. But then, as I finished the last bite of my croissant sandwich, she stood up. "I almost forgot," she said, reaching toward the drawer by the sink. She pulled out a large manila envelope and walked back over. "I wanted to show you this, just so everything's fair and clear, honey." She placed the envelope in front of me and sat back down, folding her hands. I opened it slowly. It was the updated will. I flipped through the pages, scanning the allocations. Vera and Sable were listed as joint inheritors of the house. Vera got the family jewelry. Sable was named as the primary executor. There were notes about dividing remaining funds, distributing photos, and even assigning Henrietta's car to Darren, our cousin. My name wasn't mentioned, not once, not even in the margins. I looked up. Henrietta's face was calm, serene. Like she'd expected a different kind of reaction. "So," I said, my voice low, "I'm really not part of this anymore?" She let out a breath and smiled in that gentle way she always did when explaining away something hurtful. "You have everything, sweetie. You have Alaric, that house, your career, your life is full, Vera and Sable. They need this more." I closed the envelope and set it aside. "You gave Vera the china set," I said, almost to myself. "The one I restored by hand, piece by piece." Henrietta's tone turned just slightly defensive. She always loved that set, said it reminded her of Grandma Jean. She never touched it until she saw it in my kitchen. Silence. She leaned forward. "Kira, I just need you to be the bigger person here. Don't escalate things. It'll break the family." I almost laughed. "Bigger person?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You've always been strong," she said, her eyes soft. "And quiet. That's what I've admired about you. You never needed the spotlight. You let your sisters shine." I put both hands on the table, palms flat. "So, I'm the glue and the ghost?" I asked. Henrietta's lips tightened. She looked down at her tea. I stood up, slowly. Walked toward the living room. The hallway light caught the framed photo of my father above the mantel. He was smiling in that picture, wide and proud, holding a fish he'd caught during one of our camping trips. I whispered toward the frame, "Even the dead might be ashamed of this." When I turned back, Henrietta was still at the table. "You want me to keep the peace?" I said calmly. "Then stop expecting me to be quiet while they cut me out." Her shoulders sagged slightly, not in defeat, more like in recognition. She didn't argue. I walked to the door, opened it, and paused on the threshold. I could hear birds outside, children playing somewhere down the block, the thrum of life that had nothing to do with our family's silent wars. I stepped out and pulled my phone from my bag. The draft email was still open. My thumb hovered again, but this time there was no hesitation. I hit send. Subject line, "You've made your choice." Now I'm making mine. After I hit send, I didn't check my email for the rest of the night. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and turned off every notification I could think of. Then I sat in the dark, sipping lukewarm tea, watching the ceiling fan spin like it had answers. The house was quiet. Alaric was out late reviewing merger terms with legal, and I let the silence surround me. For once, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt earned. 3 mornings later, I woke early. There was a board vote at the firm, and I was due to present a revised draft of our client compliance policy, a document I had poured 2 months into building. It would set the foundation for everything we were about to roll out in Q3. I laid out my charcoal blazer and blue blouse, the one with the crisp neckline. There was no room for distraction today. This was my name on paper, my reputation in front of a dozen stakeholders who didn't know or care about my family. By 7:50, I was in the car, portfolio in hand, coffee balanced in the cup holder, and Malis had already confirmed the meeting room was ready. I was 10 minutes away from walking into that boardroom with every ounce of control intact. And then the phone rang. It was Sable. I let it go to voicemail, then thought better of it and called back with a sigh. She answered on the second ring, breathless. "Kira," she rushed. "It's Mom. She collapsed. We're at Mercy General. I didn't know who else to call." The words hit like ice water. All the air left my lungs. "What happened?" "I don't know. She was just not responding. The ambulance came maybe 15 minutes ago. I'm in the waiting room. Can you come?" I didn't ask questions. I didn't think about the vote. I sent Malis a quick text. "Emergency with my mom. Please reschedule presentation." She replied almost instantly with, "Understood. Let me know if I can do anything." I turned the car around and headed north, my hands tight on the wheel. It took me 16 minutes to reach Mercy General. I parked in the emergency lot, jogged through the sliding glass doors, and headed straight to the desk. "I'm looking for Henrietta Washington," I said, trying not to panic. "She was brought in maybe half an hour ago." The nurse behind the counter looked up. I don't see a Henrietta Washington checked in. Are you sure she came here?" My pulse skipped. "My sister said she was brought here. She told me to come right away." The nurse double-checked her screen. "There's no record of that name, ma'am." I stepped back, trying to make sense of it. I pulled out my phone and called Henrietta. She answered on the second ring, sounding fine. "Hi, sweetheart," she said casually. "Is everything okay?" I swallowed hard. "Where are you?" "I'm at home, dear. Why?" "Sable told me you collapsed. That you were taken to Mercy General." Silence. "I have no idea what that's about," she finally said. "I've been on the porch all morning reading the paper. Nothing's wrong." The betrayal was so specific, so well-timed, that I nearly laughed. I didn't say goodbye. I hung up and walked out of the hospital into the parking lot where everything started to spin. Rage, disbelief, humiliation. I sat in the car for 10 full minutes, staring at the dashboard, letting the engine hum fill the space. That night, just as I'd started to find the edges of calm again, my phone rang. It was my Uncle Ray's wife, Denise. I hadn't spoken to her in months. "Kira, hey," she started gently. "I just wanted to double-check. Vera said you were co-signing on that business loan. You know, the one she's taking out to start her PR firm again. Ray said the bank needs a second signature, and she told them you'd agreed." I blinked. "What loan?" "She said you'd signed last week." I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't even been asked. My stomach twisted. "Denise, I didn't agree to any loan, and I certainly didn't sign anything." There was a pause on the other end. "Well, then you should talk to her, because she gave them your name." After I hung up, I didn't cry. I went straight to the filing cabinet in my home office, pulled out the folder labeled Family, and started cross-checking dates and documents. I found nothing recent. No authorization, no power of attorney. But the thought that she would use my name, my financial credibility, without permission? It made my hands shake with a kind of fury I hadn't felt in years. Alaric came home around 8. He saw me at the kitchen island, papers spread everywhere. He didn't ask, just walked over and set down his briefcase. She lied, I said flatly. Sable lied about Mom collapsing to get me to skip the board meeting. He didn't speak. And Vera used my name to co-sign a loan. Without telling me, he blinked. Do you have proof? Not yet, but Denise called me tonight. The paperwork's been sent to the bank. It's pending. Alaric nodded slowly. Send me every document. Let's make sure they can't ever use your name again. And just like that, the rage I'd been holding in began to take form. Cold, deliberate, razor sharp. The next morning, I filed a cease and desist order for unauthorized use of my identity. I looped in our family attorney Jacob and requested he begin formal inquiries into any financial documents signed in my name within the last 6 months. Then I sent an internal memo to the board at Alaric's firm, apologizing for my absence at the vote. I included screenshots of Sable's message, the timestamps, and a short paragraph that simply read, "My commitment to transparency includes holding even those closest to me accountable. I ask for the same integrity in return." By lunchtime, 3 partners had responded with support. One even wrote, "You shouldn't have to carry that kind of weight alone." I didn't reply. I just added it to my growing file, what I now called my inheritance of damage. That night, I sat on the floor of my office, laptop open, dragging files into a cloud drive folder labeled the same: email threads, medical lies, changed sender names on gifts, forged loan agreements. They wanted to weaponize my silence, so I decided to weaponize the truth. 3 days had passed since I began uploading everything to the inheritance of damage drive. And now, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, pinning my hair back as calmly as if I were preparing for brunch. My dress was deep navy, modest, but tailored to fit. The kind of dress that doesn't ask for attention, but doesn't shy away from it either. The invitation had come from the Charlotte Women in Enterprise Foundation, Quiet Impact Award Luncheon, small ceremony, community spotlight. A former client had nominated me months ago without telling me. When I got the notice, I almost declined, but something in me whispered, "Go." Alaric adjusted his cufflinks as we stood by the door. "You sure you want to walk into that room today?" he asked gently. I nodded. If I don't walk into rooms where I'm not expected, I'll never walk into any. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and handed me the keys. The venue wasn't far, downtown, 2nd floor of the Civic Cultural Center. The air buzzed with light chatter, the clinking of glassware, the crisp scent of chilled champagne. Everyone was dressed like success, polished shoes, perfectly timed laughter, and resumes tucked behind every handshake. I arrived just as the MC took the stage to start the formal program. I took my seat toward the middle of the room, grateful that I didn't recognize many faces. For once, being unknown felt like freedom. Halfway through the ceremony, the MC cleared her throat. Our next award honors a woman whose work has reshaped client accountability in the fintech space. Please welcome Kira Washington. Applause, warm, respectful. I stood and walked toward the podium, my notes folded in my palm. But before I could speak, the MC continued. This project, as many of you know, was launched with the creative oversight of her sister, Vera Washington. I stopped mid-step. The screen behind the stage lit up with photos, Vera at a networking event, Vera with clients, Vera smiling as if she'd been the architect of everything. There wasn't a single photo of me in that montage. Someone clapped slowly. Then others joined in, out of rhythm, unsure what exactly they were applauding. I reached the podium and let the clapping fade. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at the room. In this family, I began, silence is often mistaken for permission. A few people shifted in their seats. I don't come from a place that applauds easily, I continued. Which means I also come from a place where it's easier to rewrite who did what and who was even there. A pause. I've never needed my name in lights, but I have learned to stop letting people erase it in the dark. There was no anger in my voice, just gravity. I placed my note cards on the podium without using them. The project that you just saw credited. I built it. And I have no need to argue that. I have the paperwork, the strategy documents, the timestamps. I brought it to life long before anyone else touched it. I smiled, but not the polite kind. There is value in doing the work, even when your name is left off the plaque. Applause this time was slower, but deeper. I stepped down and returned to my seat. The room shifted, subtly, but unmistakably. After the ceremony, I was making my way toward the refreshment table when I heard a soft voice behind me. Dee Dee? I turned. It was Zinnia. She wore a fitted pantsuit, tablet in one hand, her phone in the other. Her face was hesitant. She looked older than I remembered, less filtered. Hi, sweetheart, I said gently. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. She leaned in slightly and whispered, Are you adopted? I blinked, caught completely off guard. Why would you ask that? Because people say you're never in the family photos, or that you just weren't around. Even Mom jokes sometimes that you're like a distant cousin. I didn't think it was true, but I don't know. I didn't flinch. I knelt down a little to meet her eyes. She looked scared, not of me, but of the answer. No, baby, I said, steady. I'm not adopted. She looked relieved, but confused. Then why do they act like you don't exist? I let the question hang. Sometimes, I answered, you have to be forgotten to remember who you really are. Zinnia stared at me for a beat longer, then nodded slowly and walked away, phone already lighting up with notifications. The whispers started within the hour. Blog posts, tweets. Who really built the Washington firm's back-end strategy? Local businesswoman calls out quiet erasure during award speech. Was this sister sabotage? Someone shared screenshots of my public patents and legal filings. I didn't do anything. I didn't feed it, but people were watching now. I found a quiet hallway, leaned against the wall, and waited. 10 minutes later, Vera stormed in. You humiliated me, she snapped, eyes wide. In front of the entire city. I didn't blink. No, Vera, you did that. I just stopped covering for you. Her mouth opened, then shut. Her eyes darted toward the hallway where someone had paused to listen. I was trying to build something, using me as the foundation, I interrupted. I won't be the scaffolding for your ego anymore. You've always had everything, Kira, she hissed. Mom, Dad, the grades, the husband. You had the luxury to stay quiet while the rest of us had to claw for space. No, Vera, I said, keeping my voice level. You just got used to taking credit for things I didn't bother to defend. That's not generosity. It's neglect. And it ends now. She stood there, speechless, for once. That night, after Alaric and I got home, I posted a photo to Instagram. It was a scan of my father's original will. My name, circled in blue ink, right next to the line where he had written, Kira gets the house. No caption, just the image. Within the hour, the comments started rolling in. You deserved better. Finally, someone saying it plain. This is what generational courage looks like. And then, a message request from a podcast producer I'd admired for years. Hi, Kira. I'd love to have you on for an episode. Your story matters. Alaric didn't say a word when he stepped out of the car that morning. He wore his dark suit, the one that only came out when something major was on the agenda, and walked ahead of me through the company's main doors. The building was humming, as usual. People nodded politely, like they always did. But beneath their composed greetings, I sensed the shift. News had already begun to travel. The night before, I'd watched him prepare the meeting slides until nearly midnight. He didn't rant, didn't curse, didn't spiral. He simply moved with surgical calm, gathering documents like a prosecutor closing a case. He only looked at me once while saving the last file to the server and said, It's time they sit in what they created. Now, as we walked through the glass lobby of the Charlotte headquarters, I felt none of the usual tension I used to carry into these walls. Not because I wasn't nervous, but because something in me had already snapped back into alignment. I wasn't looking to win anymore. I was here to restore what they'd spent years dismantling. The boardroom on the top floor had been cleared. Everyone involved had been asked to be present. No excuses. Vera arrived 5 minutes late, of course, always with an entrance. She wore a fitted ivory blazer, her hair done, lips redder than usual. She strutted in like the meeting was about a photo shoot, not a reckoning. Sable followed behind her, face tight, eyes darting. I could tell she wasn't sure if she should be smug or scared. Malis was already seated quietly near the projector screen, laptop open, posture composed. She gave me a small nod, the kind that says, "I've got you." Alaric entered last. He didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, gaze sweeping the room, then pressed the remote in his hand. The projector lit up behind him. A slide appeared. The first image was a time-stamped email. The subject line read, "Kira won't notice. She's too busy." It was from Sable. Attached was the draft of the revised family property deed, one that removed my name entirely. The next slide was a WhatsApp screenshot from Vera, casually joking that I'd never make it to the board vote because, quote, "Sable's little story will buy us some time." The third was the falsified co-signer agreement Vera had submitted to Uncle Ray's bank. No one spoke. Alaric cleared his throat. "This meeting is not about family," he began, his voice firm but controlled. "It's about institutional integrity. This company operates on transparency, accountability, and trust. The individuals in this room have violated those principles." He paused. "I don't need to raise my voice to be clear." Vera crossed her arms. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you can't fire me. I'm not even an employee here." "You've served as a contracted brand consultant for over 2 years," Alaric replied. "Effective immediately, that contract is terminated. Your access to our shared projects, data, and client portals is revoked." Vera's lips parted, but no sound came out. He turned to Sable. "You were appointed to our community outreach board at my wife's recommendation. That appointment is now rescinded." Sable's face flushed. "You can't be serious. That was a volunteer position." "That position came with internal access. You abused it. This isn't about blood. This is about behavior." 2 other employees were dismissed that morning, quietly, respectfully, but without wiggle room. They had ignored complaints, forwarded sensitive information, stood by while reputations were damaged. The room was still. Alaric looked toward me. Would you like to say anything?" I stood slowly, walked to the center of the room. My hands didn't shake. "This isn't revenge," I said. "This is restoration. This is what happens when people treat someone's silence as submission, when they confuse loyalty with liability." I let that settle before continuing. "You didn't just try to erase my name. You tried to rewrite the truth, and I'm done letting you hold the pen." There was a flicker of acknowledgement on Sable's face. A blink too long. Vera looked away. Malis closed her laptop. One quiet gesture of solidarity. By the end of the day, local blogs had picked up the story. "Wife of FinTech CEO breaks silence on family sabotage. Leadership, legacy, and the power of boundaries." My inbox lit up with podcast requests, invitations to speak. Alaric forwarded an email from a women's leadership conference in New York. "We'd love to have her as our keynote. Her voice is needed now more than ever." That evening, as I changed into sweatpants and poured myself a glass of water, my phone buzzed with a screenshot from Malis. It was Zinnia's latest Instagram post. A photo of an old family album with the caption, "We all deserve to be remembered." No tags, no explanation, just truth. Alaric walked in from the garage, rolled up his sleeves, and said, "It's done." I nodded. Across town, Vera sat alone in her apartment. The press calls had started earlier that afternoon. So had the cousin texts, some sympathetic, others asking if what they read was true. She opened her email expecting the usual updates, only to find a notification. "Your consultancy access has been disabled." She refreshed the page, tried to log in again, nothing. At the bottom of her inbox sat one unread message, no subject line, no content, just a forwarded thread. From me. The email she never answered. The one titled, "Closure is not always reconciliation. Some wounds don't heal." But I wasn't asking to be whole, I was asking to be free. That morning, light filtered through the window just right. The fig tree beside the sink had sprouted 2 new leaves overnight, and for reasons I couldn't explain, it made me smile. There was no noise in the house, no phone buzzing with false emergencies, no tension riding shotgun in the silence. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, still in my robe, and leaned against the kitchen counter. My inbox was full again. Speaking requests, notes of support from women I'd never met, some of whom had left messages like, "Thank you, I thought it was just me." I kept my head down for years. I wish I'd spoken up like you did. "Your story is my story." I didn't reply. Not yet. These things deserved a quiet heart, not one still catching its breath. By noon, I'd gotten dressed, simple, clean lines, and sat on the back porch with a notepad in my lap. A voicemail played softly on speaker. Henrietta. "I don't know what you want me to say," she began. Her voice was thin, not old, just unsure. "I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't know your sisters had. Well, not all of it. I didn't mean for this to happen. Call me if you want, or don't. I understand." I listened once. Didn't save it. Didn't delete it either. Just let it float there, unmoored. Alaric brought out lunch, leftover grilled chicken, a chopped salad, and sweet tea he'd added extra lemon to because he knew I liked it that way. We ate quietly, the sun warming our shoulders. He watched me for a moment, then said, "Would it help if we moved?" I paused, setting down my fork. "No," I answered. "I'm not running anymore." He nodded. That was it. He didn't press, didn't offer alternatives, just reached across the table and held my hand. Later that week, I called my attorney and made it official. The paperwork for the Isaiah Foundation was filed and accepted. My father's name would now live on through something more meaningful than a blurry photo on a hallway wall. The foundation's mission was simple: provide legal resources and emotional advocacy for people who'd been erased, not by governments or strangers, but by the very families who should have protected them. We opened a pilot office inside an old dental clinic 2 neighborhoods over. Small, 1 room, a donated desk, and a pot of fresh flowers. It felt like truth. That night, a private message came in from Zinnia. Her name popped up unexpectedly, but I didn't hesitate to open it. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand before. I see it now. Thank you for standing up. I'll do better." No dramatic punctuation, just those words. I replied with one thing: a sprouting plant emoji, new roots, quiet growth. I hadn't spoken to Vera, not since the boardroom. I didn't expect to. In fact, I'd written her a letter, one I rewrote 3 times. It said everything I'd wanted to say for years. Every heartbreak, every invisible moment she'd turned into a performance. I folded it neatly and placed it inside a white envelope, but I never mailed it. Instead, I sat on the porch that Saturday evening, lit a single match, and watched the letter burn slowly in a small ceramic bowl. The fire didn't roar, it just whispered. "This isn't hate," I told myself. "This is me, no longer waiting for an apology." In the weeks that followed, my podcast episode aired. The response was overwhelming. This isn't just her story, it's ours. Dignity doesn't beg to be acknowledged, it demands it. Thank you, Kira, for showing us what boundaries can look like. I didn't go viral. I went visible. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being remembered for how I tolerated. I was being seen for how I responded. I stepped outside the echo chamber of that family and built something that resonated far beyond the neighborhood. And I didn't do it with noise. I did it with clarity. One morning, about a month later, Alaric found me sitting at the kitchen table, writing in my journal. He didn't interrupt. He knew the rhythm now. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "I wasn't erased, I was redacted, and now, I've published the truth." Below that, I added one more line. "Let them tell whatever story they want. I'll be living mine." Sometimes, the loudest power comes from the one who stayed silent the longest. This story isn't just about family betrayal. It's about boundaries, reclaiming identity, and finding the strength to stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. Have you ever been the quiet one in your family? The one expected to endure, to keep peace, to disappear. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if this story spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories that hit close to home.